Sounded great.
Good. All right. Sounds good.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Just a little background about myself. I'm a writer for the American Conservative Town Daily Caller, some of those types of sites, and I come from I try to integrate my study of anthropology into current events and issues of the day. I'm not a trained anthropologist, but I am a student of Rene Girard. Are you familiar with?
I know the name, but I don't know him.
Yeah. Well, he taught at Stanford University. He was a member of the French Academy, and he recently passed away in 2015. One of his most famous students would be Peter Thiel. He was a student of his at
Oh,
Stanford.
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Smart guy, Peter
yeah,
Thiel.
yeah, he is. I was really intrigued by his work, and so my writing project is called A Neighbor's Choice, and I integrate my understanding of Girard's anthropology, which is he calls it mimetic theory, and I integrate that as a kind of a guidepost for some of the patterns that we see in the headlines around us, particularly revolving around religion and the nature of violence, the nature of sacrifice, and the sacred in our
Right.
current affairs. And so
Right.
it's an honor to have you. I see you as an icon for public debate and discourse about all of these big ideas, these big
Yeah.
topics.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and so I've got your book here, Heavens on
Yay.
Earth,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I
Okay.
enjoyed
Good.
it. I encourage everyone to pick up a copy, take a look at
Thank
it,
you.
whichever side of the debate on these things that you might fall on. So, but yeah, I'm glad that you put that out there. We need to have that discussion.
I think so. Yeah. That's why I write.
Now, with this new book, you cover a lot of different things. You talk about people, different religions, conceptions of the afterlife. I happen to be a Christian myself. I define my Christian faith as simply the desire to imitate the person of Jesus Christ as a historical person. So,
Well, you got the hair and the beard going.
yeah.
Are you wearing sandals?
No, just socks today. So,
Okay.
and I don't know if they're kosher socks. I know there's a particular way to do the sewing there that we should get
Oh,
right.
I see. Okay. All right. So, what do you think happens to you after the death of your physical body?
I think I guess I'm a classical Christian on that. I think there's some sense that there's a resurrection that we can expect. Yeah, I take that. I take that for the kind of the traditional understanding of that.
Do
But
you think? Do you think it's a physical resurrection or just soul without the body?
I think it's a physical resurrection. I think
Wow.
I think the purpose of the of Jesus is bringing heaven to earth, not us going up to heaven. So, have you ever read N.T. Wright's work?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was all about we're not the point of Christianity is not about dying so you could good boy or girl and be a great person so that you can go to heaven. That's more of a Platonic, older concept of Christianity. What I'm interested in is the earthly imitation and embodiment of what Jesus imagined the kingdom of heaven to be and
Right.
lived. You know what I mean? So my definition of Christianity might be a little strange for some because I think if you want to be like Jesus, that makes you a Christian. Christian
Yeah,
means
glad to
to
hear that. Yeah, because I write here in the book about when Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven is within you, and that he famously said to his disciples. Let me get the quote exactly right here. Um, Verily I say unto you, there will be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man come in his kingdom. Matthew 16:26. I think he was talking about creating a heaven on earth. That is, the heavens are within us. The heavens are here. This is the point: is to try to create a better world.
right,
And that's really what why I call it heavens on earth. First of all, it's plural. There's many versions of it, and here it's here. Not whether there's an afterlife or not is really beside the point because we don't live in the afterlife.
right.
We live in this life. And so the point is to make it as good as possible for not just yourself, but for everybody.
Right. Yeah. And so I
If
say,
that's what you mean by leading the life of Jesus, then okay, I'm on board with that. That's
yeah.
good.
So yeah, I think that's my definition. I don't believe. Here's the thing. I'll give you an example of why I have a problem with the way most people think of Christianity, in America at least. Both Christianity's critics as well as its, evangelists have this conception, whether they're on the left or the right, that Christianity, what Jesus did in history. I think you believe he was a historical person, most likely, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what Jesus did in history, they have this conception, and this analogy is as best as I can come up with so far, that it's as if you're telling an African American boy in 2018 that the only way you can experience the benefits of what Martin Luther King did in history to allow you to have equal access to all of the different things that Americans should enjoy, right? To not have segregated water fountains. It's as if Christianity, the way we conceive of it and talk about it, it's as if we would say, it's as if someone would say, well, you don't get to drink into the water fountain until you accept and truly believe that Martin Luther King really did what we said he did in history. Do you see what I'm saying here? It's a worship of mental models rather than an embodied imitation of a transformation that's happened in history. Does that make sense?
I think so. But as I understand it, from the Christian perspective, since I was once there, you have to accept Jesus as your Savior, who died. He died for your sins, or else you do not go to heaven, or may not go to heaven. I guess Jews don't accept Jesus as the Messiah, although they worship the same God in the same Old Testament book anyway. But so that sounds like it's not quite what you're saying, though.
Yeah, I'm saying that Jesus demonstrably changed history. He created a new world order, which we can get into, and I think it relates to what you talk about in your book. He changed history in tangible, direct ways for the way we conduct aesthetic, the way we conduct law, economics, the way we conceive of an individual. I think all of that came through what Jesus was trying to inaugurate.
Okay, but that's a historical question. To what extent did this force or that force shape the way we live now? And an argument could be made, Christianity had some role in that. I wrote a previous book, The Moral Arc, about the arc of the moral universe bending toward justice. Why is that? What role did religion play versus reason and the Enlightenment and science and so on? Anyway, but that's different than the theological question of to get to heaven, whatever that means, physically, spiritually, or whatever, you do have to accept Christ as your Savior, right?
Well, not in the conception, not in the way that it's been traditionally taught. So what I'm saying is when they use a lot of those passages in the New Testament, like faith in Christ, that's a mistranslation. It should be rendered something closer to the fidelity of Jesus himself. It's the idea that Jesus' faithfulness to what it means to be made in the image of God, of what it means to be fully and perfectly human, to not use violence against your neighbor. That faithfulness of Jesus is what saves you, not your mental model assent to him doing those things. So we got a Cartesian, unfortunately, you and I have inherited a Cartesian obsessed model, or not obsessed, but a Cartesian influenced model of Christianity where it's about memorizing or mentally assenting to certain propositional facts about Jesus' life for it to work on you.
That's what most Christians do. I mean, you are in the minority in this sort of intellectualized version of Christianity.
Well, theirs is intellectualized because I'm saying you live it. You live it. You just live like Christ.
Okay,
but I know what you're saying. Yeah.
The average evangelical will tell you, if you don't accept Jesus as your Savior, you're not going to heaven. That's what most of them think.
Right. Well,
polls show that consistently, and that's why they put the banners up at football games. John 3:16, for God so loved the world, He gave His only begotten Son, so that you have everlasting life. And other passages, that if you don't accept Jesus, you're not going to heaven. So I'm glad to hear what you're saying. Yeah. I mean, but I think traditional Christians would consider you a liberal Christian, a pretty liberal theological, even though you're apparently conservative.
But I believe in the real resurrection of Jesus Christ, so I'm very conservative on that.
Oh, you are. Oh, so okay. So
the real physical resurrection of Jesus. Yeah.
Okay, so he was resurrected. Okay, so let's say back to where we started. You are physically resurrected upon the death of your body. So you're up there with Jesus and God or whatever's up there.
No, it's
How,
here. It's Earth.
it's here. How, well, where?
It'll be probably. I don't know exactly what the language is referring to precisely, but it seems to me as if it will probably be this Earth. So perhaps Mount Everest will still be just as beautiful and just as icy. Hopefully, global warming hasn't warmed it up too much, right?
Oh man, David, I don't know. Okay, how old are you when you're resurrected?
I don't know. You know, Jesus had the scars on his hands and feet when he was appearing before his disciples. So there's some indication that you carry some semblance of whatever form you had in your previous life before you resurrected. So but it's also strange about the New Testament because there's an indication that the people who saw him, sometimes they didn't recognize him at first. Like the ladies in the garden, they said they thought he was a gardener. Remember? And then he said, "Oh no, Mary." And then they suddenly had this kind of recognition. Oh, this is Jesus. So there's a sense in which, and what's interesting also about that is that Jesus doesn't want us to objectify him like what we were talking about. He doesn't want us to cling too tightly to him because he tells the lady in the garden, after he resurrects, he says, "Don't cling too tightly, for I'm about my mission." And that's a literary device to let us know that Jesus is saying, don't objectify the textual Jesus as another ideological, again, propositional assent that you can put in your pocket and say, "I've attained Christ." Another illustration of this difference of perspective would be, and again, you always have to go back to Jesus to get the illustrations I'm trying to make. Like when he was in the stormy boat, right? And he tells Peter, "Come out of the boat and walk on water with me," right? The way we conceive of Christ in popular Christianity, it's as if we stay in the boat trembling and just say, "There you are, the great man of history. Oh, you're like Hercules. You can walk on water, but I surely can't." But what Jesus says is, no, you don't stay timid and worship me. You get out of the boat and you become me. And only when you be me do you actually experience what it means to be what we call today a Christian or a follower of Jesus.
So,
right?
so you think a Christian means that these stories, like the one you are metaphorical?
I believe but they're also literary device to them. There are different layers. There's a historical reality to them, and there's also a literary device that's at play that's actually absolutely marvelous in its ability to bring insight.
The story is being told to us as a lesson for how to live your life here in this world, not how to get to the next world.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could say it there, but there is a historical dimension to what's happening in those stories. But there's also the literary element of how the writers are writing these stories in a way to make us understand the deeper truths of what's historically, literally happening. So, yeah, I mean...
What if Jesus was a real person, which I agree he probably was, and I get my information from Bart Ehrman, the great biblical scholar, who I just had a dialogue with, similar to what we're doing. He has a new book out called The Triumph of Christianity. You should interview him about this. Basically, it's a historical book about the rise of Christianity from 20 members in 30 CE to about 25 million members in 400 CE. And it's not just the conversion of Constantine or the conversion of Paul. There's 1,000 steps in between to grow the religion. That's a separate question. He doesn't think Jesus was resurrected. He thinks he was the person who was crucified. Romans crucified everybody. Favorite form of torture. So I don't have to doubt that. But to make the leap then from a real person who's crucified to resurrected and died for my sins, those latter two are more theological. I mean, how would you, for a historian like Bart Ehrman or a scientist like me, how would you prove that?
Well,
of a tenet of your faith, but how would you prove it in the same way you'd say, well, Romans crucified people and Jesus probably lived?
Well, there's a lot of the classical arguments you can make, but there's also an anthropological one I can make that scientifically I think gives evidence for a real resurrection. But the classical arguments, I'm sure you've debated some of the best apologists in the world, but the idea, why would they put women as the initial eyewitnesses reporting. That's a very weak propaganda piece. If you want to sell someone on your good old time religion in that day and age, you wouldn't put women whose testimony was not valid in the court of law. You would never make your primary initial witnesses in all four accounts and in subsequent accounts be hinging upon the testimony of a woman. So if these people are just trying to sell a propaganda piece to try to make some kind of a cult and sell it so they can keep it going and have a little bit of a mini empire or whatever they want, they're not doing a really smart idea by intentionally all four independently putting women as the original eyewitness account. So that's a piece of evidence that gives it some credibility on that point.
Well, sort of not for independent. I mean, the gospel authors worked off of Mark initially, and then there's other sources. Yeah, for example, that Bart Ehrman talks about.
But they even contradicted each other on some of the who exactly was in the women. So if they're really just trying to duplicate a propaganda piece to the T, I mean, there's obviously some evidence that there's some independent sources behind this, because if they're just copying Mark or something, wouldn't they get that contradiction eliminated? So it gives some evidence, just like when you have a what's that?
Copying errors.
Yeah, well, it's just like we do. I have some friends who are detectives, and they're always key to let you know whenever you see an eyewitness report of an accident or a crime, there's always witnesses that will remember something. Well, there was 2 people or there was 4.
Yeah.
That's just standard procedure.
But so if the historical arguments for that, the latter two, you're arguing for the resurrection, not the kind of the theological he died for my sins statement. Why don't Jews accept it, or why don't Muslims accept the arguments that are made for the resurrection of Christ? And you have these great rabbinical scholars that are super smart, well-read, deeply steeped in the tradition of biblical analysis and so on. They look at the same body of evidence and go, nope, I don't think Jesus was the Messiah. They believe that there's a Messiah. They just don't think Jesus was the Messiah. And of course, Muslims believe something different still. But again, it's not like in physics, we have general acceptance of the Big Bang Theory, say, for example, and it's not like you go to the Muslim world and they have a different. Well, maybe that's not good. They probably have a different creation model there. But among scientists, it's not like you go to India and the scientists there have a different kind of physics or a different theory of the Big Bang or whatever. There's a kind of convergence of evidence toward a single theory that best explains what we see in the world. Religion, it seems to me, is quite different from that. You get these historical traditions that go down different pathways, and depending on where you happen to have been born, when you happen to have been born, who your parents were, and so on, kind of directs you down a certain pathway. Now you can jump out of the channel into a different channel. That does happen, but not that common. Such that if the arguments were so convincing, like the 4 women were there and so on, why don't Jews look at that and go, yep, Jesus is the Messiah definitely because he was resurrected?
Well, Jesus said very clearly, do not resist evil with violence, and I can't get Christians to imitate him on that, so they can't believe him on that either. So the gospel writers and Paul, they make it clear that it's going to be considered foolish to the wise of the world. That's the point. It's supposed to be a stumbling block. It's supposed to challenge our conceptions of what is wise. The learned people have always wrestled with something that kind of humbles us to consider that we can't completely figure everything out. And I think you're very good to, in your text, you always go back to embrace the mystery. So there is that. You can't, it's not meant to be proven 100% scientifically. But, like I illustrated earlier, so if you're a propaganda artist, why would you put women in that context, first century in that context? Why would you put women to be your primary eyewitness? That's not very smart, right? If you want to make something sell, they thought of women's testimony like children back then.
Maybe there were women there poking around after Jesus died, wondering in mourning. Who knows? Now you mentioned earlier before we jumped on the Skype here that you talked to Jordan Peterson. Now, Peterson's an interesting guy, so he knows a lot about these stories. I don't think he's a Christian in any traditional sense. But one of the things I like about his research is the kind of mythic, metaphorical nature of these biblical stories. And such that, now he pushes the idea that they're true in some real sense. I think we can derive truths from literature, that great novels are great in part because they touch something deep about human nature. They reveal something about human society and human nature that turns out to be true. So it could be that where we started, that there was a man named Jesus. He was a teacher, an itinerant teacher, and so on. And the stories are not meant to be taken literally true. They're metaphors. Like the Sermon on the Mount is filled with these parables. Well, the parables are not always easy to understand. Why didn't he just tell us, give us the 12 rules of life like Jordan did? Here's rule number 3. But he speaks in these parables, and they have to be interpreted. But maybe that's a better way of delivering a deeper truth. That it's not true. I mean, it's not. These things didn't really happen. He wasn't really in a boat and walked on water, told Peter to come out of the boat. None of that really happened. It's a made-up story, but it's a story that has a lesson for where you started here, that we should be more Christ-like in our dealings with other people. I'm okay with that. Like, okay, in that sense, then the Christian story would be, no different from than some of the other great literary traditions of the past several thousand years that deliver some kind of a moral homily for us to understand.
Yeah, and that's totally, you're in the right direction, but I would just say keep an open mind, of course, like you would always do. You're the ultimate skeptic, but also keep an open mind to the idea that there is some historical evidence there. Why would people die for a lie? They knew that if they knew the guy was rotting in his grave or someone hit him, they said, I saw him, and that's what a lot of these people die. They die refusing to recant, not that he's the Hercules. He's not in the sense of the traditional, who's the big bad God. That's not what they were being told to renounce. They were being told to renounce their testimony of the real resurrection of Jesus, because it was a problematic thing to talk about with such sincerity. Why would and another thing, just think about human nature.
Let me address that one.
Okay.
Because that's an important point. So I happen to be watching the Paramount Studio series Waco about the Branch Davidians and David Koresh. Okay, so one of the insights. So the series is based on 2 books. One by the negotiator who was outside for the FBI. The other one by one of the survivors of the Branch Davidians who was inside the compound. And one of the revealing things is when the FBI is treating it like a hostage situation, like, let 3 children go and we'll give you some milk and so on. And the guy on the inside is going, this isn't a hostage situation. We don't want to leave. Mm-hmm. We want to be here. We chose to be here. And if we're going to die with this guy, that's what we want to do. Now, so there's much debate about whether they killed themselves or the feds torched them intentionally or accidentally, whatever. But that's beside the point. My point is that people will go to their deaths believing something deeply religious, ideological, purposeful, whatever. Some of the Jonestown people were murdered, but most of them drank the Kool-Aid, which has now become almost a cliche. Even secular Marxists have killed themselves in the name of, because I consider Marxism kind of a faux religion.
Right.
Or the ISIS. Why would people strap on bombs to kill themselves in the name of? Because that's what people do. We're moralizing agents that become super motivated by a particular cause, and so I can definitely see why Jesus followers would go to their deaths or whatever in the name of him or his beliefs, whatever. For sure,
Paul in that early text where he's recounting the people who've seen the resurrected Jesus. He says there's 500 people in total that witnessed this.
One story that said 500 people, not 500 independent stories.
Well, but the 500 people, he said, saw Jesus bodily resurrected, right? They didn't say some kind of a spiritual ghostly apparition. And so the idea, these people are not all being kept isolated with Jesus. They're not being in a cult. We don't see any evidence of a cult-like atmosphere in which they're being brainwashed and isolated with a cult of personality. In fact, Jesus is doing the opposite. He's saying what no great man, no philosopher, or no other cult or whatever has ever said, which is, you'll do things greater than me. You're going to move mountains. You're going to go way beyond what I've done. He says that literally. So he's not saying you need to stay with the Branch Davidians. Was a classic cult leader in the traditional way we always find in history, where it's an egoic based approach where you say, cling to me, just try to keep up, and I will protect you as your Savior. We don't get that with Jesus. We get, you will be me, you will do better, you will do greater things than I did, and go out and go out. There's not an inward kind of like stick in your little clique and hallucinate and think that I'm here. There's no evidence of that kind of predatory call.
But what about the stuff where he tells people to abandon their families and follow him?
Well, that's actually a very great anthropological segue. That's what Jesus is getting into there is he says, I've come to bring a sword. And he says, and in another passage, he says, I've come to bring peace, but not the peace that the world gives. And so what Rene Girard is helpful in pointing out is that there's really two kind of logos, so to speak, that have always been, a contention, intention in history. The logos of the ancient world, and by logos I just mean the divine social ordering principle, the supreme, glue that binds us all together, some kind of common logic, right? So there's two types of common logic. You have the logic of sacrifice, and then you have the logic which Jesus introduced, which John talks about in the beginning of the Gospel of John, the logos of self-offering, of self-giving. So there's really, in the text of the Gospels, we see a choice. And this choice actually undermines and breaks down, just like you have done, breaks down the logic of the sacred. So actually, as Zizek would say, he goes a different way on some things, but Zizek would say to be a true atheistic skeptic, you have to go through Christianity, because what Jesus is doing, to be...
They're Jewish atheists.
Yeah. Well, no, but he would say to be truly skeptical, to be a true atheist of what he calls it the big other, the idea that there's some kind of transcendent absolute. Jesus breaks that apart. And the only way you can see that is if you understand the anthropological dimension. That Rene Girard would say that the Bible is actually an anthology of the science of man. And it's only because of the Bible that we as moderns are able to be so self-critical of our own religious superstitions and our old ways of violently sacrificing common scapegoats or witch hunts. So it's the Bible that is a kind of a desacralizing agent that kind of acidly washes. I mean, it's like an acid that's breaking down the structures of our pre-sacred myths.
I think you read back from 21st century worldview that has been radically altered by Enlightenment values, the expansion of human rights, civil liberties, equal treatment of people under the law. Christians centuries ago would have argued quite differently from you, with the same textual support from the Holy Book in support of slavery or capital punishment or how women should be treated, the treatment of Jews, and so on. So your current interpretations are informed by a modern worldview that I argue in the Moral Arc was pushed mainly from Enlightenment values of reason and science, in a very broad sense, not religion. I mean, religion, I don't think, can be the driver of moral progress because of its sclerotic nature of not having a mechanism to change as times change. Religions do change very slowly, because in a way they have to. I mean, the average conservative Christian today is way more liberal than liberals were in the 1950s. Just all of our moral sensibilities have been expanded by culture from the bottom up, and so I think this parable reading and interpretation is very much dependent on the context of who's doing the reading and what time in history. So again, to push that it's really true in some sense, either theologically or the kind of way Jordan Peterson means true, is going to be difficult to prove in a sense that, say, a century from now, people may read the Gospels in still a different way. I'm old enough now, and I was once a born-again Christian in the 70s. I went to Pepperdine University, and I took courses in the life of Jesus, the writings of C.S. Lewis, Old Testament, New Testament, and so on. And so I still kind of follow the literature and sometimes just sort of see what people are on about. And it's changed just in my lifetime. Just, what did Jesus meant when he said this or that? And there's all these different interpretations and they change. So to me, again, I think we're talking literature here, not truth in some kind of real sense that, that Jesus was a real person and he delivered an important message. And here's the message: we should be more Christ-like in how we treat other people. Okay. But to go further, and he was really resurrected, not that the resurrection stood for something. I mean, it's like Christians wear a cross around their neck, which is analogously to like Jews wearing a little shower head around their neck or something. I mean, it's a sign of violence and torture, but of course it's become symbolic of something else. And so the symbolism, okay, fine, I get the symbolic truths of things that change the way I live my life. Mm-hmm. Again, the 12 rules or the Sermon on the Mount, and here are the things that matter the most. Sure. Love your neighbor as yourself, and so on. Okay, but you got to do a lot of kind of spin doctoring of some of the text that it doesn't ring so well. Most of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, for example, you would not follow any of that stuff today. No thoughtful Jew or Christian would follow any of that today.
Yeah, but the point of being a Christian is to, again, and I can make a case for it just by pointing out at the words of Jesus: eat my body, drink my blood, become me. He's telling you to be the embodiment of literal. You look at his life. So when it says do not resist evil with violence, that's not a Hallmark card. That's actually a new way of looking at humans themselves. It's what I call the Personhood Revolution. Prior to this, we don't have any what you call myth. We don't have any myth that recognizes the human dignity of every person in their worth, that they are.
Well, I would beg to differ. I think the Buddha had some pre-Christian ideas about that. As did some other ancient philosophers. You can find what you're looking for, but
they'd renounce sacrifice. Jesus renounced sacrifice.
But do you well, sort of. I mean, in a way, it's sort of a cannibalistic religion. I mean, you have to eat the body of Jesus and drink his blood.
Well, I want to. Do you know that the evidence suggests that the earliest records of human culture is founded on ritual cannibalism?
Yes, well, cannibalism is real throughout history.
Do you think that might have a connection to what Jesus is talking about?
No, I think.
Why is he talking about that?
I think we don't
I
think
see,
it's symbolic.
But we don't. But what is okay? So, but he says in the word, he uses the Greek word for gnaw on my flesh, and so so he's saying gnaw in a real sense. Why would he bring up this cannibalistic notion of? That's something that we see tens of thousands of years ago at the roots and archaeological evidence of the earliest record of all human cultures. All of them, whether we go to the South American cultures or wherever, we see evidence of ritual cannibalism. Why is he talking about that? We don't see that in the Old Testament. Where's he getting that from?
Yeah, it's interesting. And why is he making that? I would ask you, why is he making that a central tenet of accepting him and his religion? Catholics take the sacrament. They eat the cracker, they drink the wine, and a lot of so it's debatable, I guess, amongst Catholics about whether it's to be taken literally. I mean, does the cracker literally become a piece of the body of Christ, or are we just talking metaphor here? And some people think, well, literal.
Sure.
I mean, do you think do you take the sacraments? Do you transubstantiation, that the cracker literally becomes the body of Jesus, or are you admitting this is just a story?
I think what he's talking about with eat my body, drink my blood is a key point to understanding the anthropological evidence of what the Christian revelation is trying to reveal in history. And that's precisely what it is. It's not trying to. It actually is. Jesus says that, we're going to work out our salvation with fear and trembling. And that concept is happening throughout history as we start to come to grips, with what that actual core tenet of the faith means. So I'm speaking a little bit cryptically here because I'm not doing that intentionally, but there's a little bit to unpack there. What does that mean? That eat my body, drink my blood is at the very heart, and we don't see any precedent for that, by the way, in the Old Testament, where there's a prophecy that the Messiah should be eaten, right? So that's something earlier that he's there's a connection he's making to the very heart of what civilization founded on. At the earliest, like, Göbekli Tepe.
Hold on. Cannibalism was not a central tenet of civilization necessary to happen for it to unfold. I mean, it's an aberration. It was real. We have some archaeological evidence of this, but not that it was rampant in like a daily part of one's diet.
I don't mean that by any means. What I'm saying is that the earliest records of human archaeology, we see evidence of ritual cannibalism and ritual human sacrifice. That's something. It's something, and it's early evidence of where we find human culture and society.
No, where in the New Testament do you see Jesus condemning human sacrifice?
Well, that's the whole point of the story. But I mean,
okay, so here we go. So you're interpreting this story.
Well, no, I mean, he says go and he says it. He goes.
Why not just say, "Thou shalt not sacrifice babies anymore"?
That's a great point, because that's why the only way to know that is that you have to understand the anthropological revelation that he's making. What he's saying there you said "thou shalt not." When you do "thou shalt nots," what does that do? It creates a cycle of power where you're trying to get the power back. So whenever you make a prohibition, I'll give you an example of this, just to see, because you're raising really good questions, and we're going to the woman caught in adultery, where he says, "He who is without sin cast the first stone." If he were to say, "You shall not kill her," he would have been killed too, and the girl would have been killed as well. He would have inflamed the desire, like the hot stove, right? Do not the power play. What's that?
You're saying it's a strategy for altering human behavior in a way that's a little more effective. Okay.
But it's not a little bit. What you just tapped into is the very heart of why we have the Enlightenment and the modern conceptions that you have been a great proponent of. I'm telling you, I know that we can't get into all of it, but I'm trying to give you little snippets as to the anthropological scientific evidence for the revelation of Christ. So I understand some of it might sound a little different than,
Well, again, I'm pretty sure that sort of traditional theologians consider you a liberal theologian.
Well, and the liberals consider me a conservative, so I'm doing something right. But that's what I tell people. Jesus, when he tells those people who's going to cast the first stone, what he's doing is he's inaugurating the first time in history in which the collective is being challenged out of the spell of groupthink. This is the first example that we have, a demonstrable case in which someone is saying, "Hey, get out of the spell of groupthink. Who is going to cast the first stone? Is it Bill? Is it Tim? Is it Joe? I've got a rock. He's got a rock. Who's going to cast it?" And what that does is it's like breaking the spell. Humans get, we see this with revolutions in our contemporary time. Humans get into almost a trance with group behavior, right? They get into almost like a sinking, like a magnetic power that kind of overwhelms them, and they become kind of lost like a herd. And Jesus is calling each one of those with that simple question to consider their personhood, to consider their personal responsibility for the collective violence they're about to engage in. And so instead of them throwing stones mindlessly, when you do that, by the way, if you're the 50th guy in the back, you can always say, "I didn't kill her. I don't even think my stone hit her," right? So it anonymizes the violence, and therefore it allows you to stay in this mythic sense of justice. But when you have to be, well, is it you first or is it me? Now you have to have that moment of empathy. And when you have that, what happens is he creates a imitation pattern of nonviolence. They each throw the stones, starting from the oldest person. The elderly people throw their stones first, and the younger men imitate them in nonviolence. Uh-huh. So that's a powerful example. You helped me illustrate there with the radical nature of Jesus. This is something we don't see in the ancient archaic religions before the person of Christ, and it's not something you see, in some of the other.
I think I would recommend reading Barton's book, How Jesus Became God. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting story about how do you go from an itinerant preacher that's just a regular carpenter to a deity. Well, there's a whole series of steps of how that came about historically, and most of the stories about Jesus, his miraculous healings and so forth, these are they have a long literary tradition going back centuries. Most of the stories in the Bible have predecessor stories that are similar, that they kind of are incorporated. So in this sense, the Bible is a wiki, kind of edited and processed for centuries until it was kind of canonized in the 4th century and so on. And then we have what we have, and then there's the Apocrypha and all these other books that have been discovered, that just didn't get voted in. This tells us how cultural and historical, contextual the whole process is. And to me, it seems like that one of the reasons I gave up my Christianity was just understanding more about how all this stuff came about. A couple of sources. First, like studying mythology. You mentioned this is important for you, this anthropologist you study. Well, I took courses in anthropology in graduate school, and I found out that there's all these other people and all these other religions, like comparative world religions courses, that believe just as strongly as I did, that they have the one true religion, and so on. And they can't all be right. They're in conflict with each other. So, or more to the point, maybe none of them are right. Right in the sense of true, like really out there true, as opposed to historically true for us or something like that. That was a big part of my deconversion, as it were. But also the problem of evil. I don't see how Jesus adds anything to solving the theodicy, or the problem of evil. Why bad things happen to good people, and so on. And I'm not just talking about humans have free will, and this is why there's murders or homicides or or crime or whatever. I'm talking about like childhood leukemia. Like, why do people have to die, and innocent people for thousands of years died in childbirth? Women, infant rates of mortality were astronomically higher than they are now. Only recently have they gone down. So why would God allow all that? So I don't see how Jesus changes that problem. So to me, that was the ultimate kind of turning point.
Sure. So that theodicy was the biggest thing for you. That was the last straw.
One of the big, that's right. Yeah,
it's something that I wrestle with to this day. But I think that those are intellectual questions that we can attack from so many different angles. We got to stick to me, what the core of what Jesus is all about. He's not saying, which unfortunately it seems like you were told, were a Christian, that you have to accept this mental proposition and pick this ideology from among a basket of ideologies or religions. Pick which mental assent propositional list, right? You pick that, and you own it, and now you somehow possess the identity of Christianity.
Well,
I call that an objectification of Christ, right? It's not the imitation.
Most Christians, that's what they're offering.
But guess what? Here's the good news from my end. They're wrong. So,
okay.
What I'm saying is
wrong. I mean, Billy Graham just died. This is his whole mission for a century was, come on out of the seats, come on up and accept Jesus as your Savior. I mean, boom.
The process. And the reason why is that it's not about getting the SAT test right to get into heaven, and that's okay. And so even when those people, so to speak, like Graham, get some of the models about Jesus wrong, that doesn't make them out, And so God has a process that's unfolding in humanity, where we're becoming aware of who we are as a species. And the Bible leads to that. That's what I would say.
So what do you think heaven is like, and where did you get that idea?
I got it from, I believe that heaven is what is, Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is within you all. I think Jesus inaugurated a real resurrection process, and that I don't know what the in-between state is. I don't know if you go into soul sleep or whatever people talk about. There's debates about that theologically. But I do believe historical resurrection. And the key to understanding the significance of the Bible from an anthropological standpoint is that resurrection event, because you are right. You are precisely correct that Jesus is not the only dying and rising Savior that we see. There are other mythological stories going on in history about dying and rising Saviors. And those dying and rising myths are created independently of one another. Would you not accept that those were independently derived mythic dreams, as the Indians would say, right?
Yes, the Jungians would say that, yeah. And well, so there's either that or it's cultural transmission, which also happens. So you have to look at each case independently to see if it's cultural transmission or independent invention. But I'm kind of getting back
Sure.
to this. What's heaven? This is what I'm talking about is what's heaven like? What's the afterlife like? I mean, the average person who's not religious today wants like Woody Allen. I don't want to live on in my work. I want to live on in my apartment. I just want to keep going. And but that's not what happens. There's a break in the continuity from one day to the next. So if your body's in the grave, what is the soul? What is it that's supposed to continue on? Well, the idea I talk about is your pattern of information. Is what defines you, because you, as a physical body, are not the same person you were a decade ago. The cells are all reprocessed. Well, most of the atoms in your body are gone, and they're replaced by other atoms. So the stuff that you're made out of is quite different than it was before. Quite different, but different stuff. It's the pattern. You look like you, and that's your DNA is programming you to look a certain way. But also not just your DNA, your genome, your connectome. The connectome is the pattern of all your memories, all the synaptic connections in your brain. That represents you, all your memories. And so this is the idea I talk about in Heavens on Earth is this, we're going to copy this, the mind uploading scenario. We're going to copy your connectome, put it in the cloud, and turn it on, and you'll be there. So the cloud, the computer cloud, internet cloud, is something like a heaven, sort of a celestial Silicon Valley. And but even that has, to me, severe limitations of the definition of who you are, because that's just what's called your memory self, I'm just waving to my wife. And but you're more than just your mem self. You're a point of view self, the POV self. That is the you looking out through your eyes. The lights are on upstairs. You're conscious of the world. Now there is a break in consciousness at night when you go to sleep. Sort of, there's some interruptions with dreams, or you get general anesthesia. It's boom, boom, lights out for 4 or 5 hours, whatever. But you come back, and the continuity is still there. You have memories of yourself. You're looking at the world through your eyes, and so on. If you die, and the idea is, will you wake up somewhere else, either in heaven with Jesus or whatever Muslims believe or whatever Jews believe? Jews, by the way, are the least likely to believe in the afterlife, and ancient Jews had no notion of an afterlife or heaven. You weren't going anywhere. You just returned to where you were before you were born, which was nowhere. It's just darkness. It's just emptiness. There's just nothing. The whole business of the afterlife gets invented later and grafted on by Christians from other surrounding cultures, and then after Descartes and dualism, then it's no longer your physical body, it's just your soul, although there's some people still like yourself that believe you're physically resurrected. But as my friend Julia Sweeney says, she's the Saturday Night Live comedian, when the Mormon boys came by her house to give them a pitch for being a Mormon, they said, when you go to heaven, you'll be made whole again, and the blind shall see, and the deaf shall hear, and the crippled shall be whole again. And she said, well, I had my uterus taken out because I had uterine cancer. Do I get my uterus back in heaven? And they said, yeah. And she goes, I don't want it back. What if you had a nose job and you liked it? In other words, what are we really talking about here when we're talking about the physical resurrection of the body or the soul or whatever? And then when I was a Christian, I tell another story in the book about witnessing to one of my college professors who was a philosophy professor, and he was an atheist. He wanted to know if there's golf courses and tennis courts in heaven. And I'm like, what? I don't know. He goes, well, it sounds boring if there's nothing to do. We need challenges. We need things to overcome. And this utopian idea, well, heaven is perfect, perfect food, everything you want to eat, the land of milk and honey, and so on, and just supreme love, and everything is great. That sounds good for about an hour. And after that, it just sounds boring. That's why Christopher Hitchens called the Christian heaven celestial North Korea. It's like there's this dictator that knows everything and controls everything, is all powerful, all knowing. And then what? You just sit there and bask in the glory of the great leader. That doesn't sound like a kind of place I'd want to go.
Yeah, that's not. You're going to be able to climb Mount Everest probably. That's most likely what the biblical text is alluding to, the idea that Paul says it's all about heaven on earth. Jesus says that it's not about going off into some disembodied neoplatonic state where you're playing a harp. That's silly. You're,
Okay.
I don't know what that. Look. I haven't been there. I don't know exactly what it's like when you die. I mean, you know, there is those near-death experiences which you cover very interestingly in your book, and people who are interested in those should read your book to see that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe perhaps it's like falling asleep. You wake up and then you're in this physical embodied state of planet Earth that we're in today. I mean, yeah, I believe that's
Okay.
plausible.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I might be up for that. And because I once was a true believer and I accepted Jesus, although maybe according to you, I don't even have to have done that.
Well, look,
here I'm in.
I'm not going to be an expert, so I'm not going to say it's wrong and I just got. But what I am saying is that if you look at Jesus seriously for what he's saying, and not of course there's going to be mental models that get it wrong. I mean, if you're a professor, you're going to have people come into your class and get it really wrong. And they're going to flunk around. They're not going to listen. They're going to take your lectures out of context. And just because they fail and regurgitate nonsense outside of your classroom doesn't mean you judge the professor. Perhaps they were being poor students. And I think that's where we get a lot of bad junk along the way. Human beings, we're working this revelation out in history. And it's not, the Bible predicts that the kingdom of heaven is like yeast working itself out in a loaf. It's a very slow process that humanity is coming to wake up. And the church, of course, is the first to be stuck in the old sacrificial logic of pre-Christianity, in which sacrifice was considered the logic of society. And that's what I would highly encourage you to, you've done a great job of anthologizing so much of what, different world religions think of the afterlife. I would encourage you to also look into the work of René Girard, and he's got some great comparative studies of mythology and what he discovered. He actually converted to Christianity because of his study of mythology. He studied literature. He studied the great novels of Europe. And he looked for patterns of human behavior, and so he noticed there was a similar pattern in all the great works of literature, and namely, he calls it mimetic desire. Mimetic desire is just the idea that we copy the desires of our neighbors, and so we don't just copy the dress or the postures or the gestures. We also copy what we perceive our neighbors to be desiring, and so.
And what does he believe? Is he a Christian or is he? Yeah,
he passed away in 2015. He was a Catholic, so he converted to Christianity after he studied the different world mythology texts as well as Western literature, and then he looked at the Bible, and he was looking kind of in the same spirit as you, a great skeptic, and he was looking to deconstruct all religions, and then he realized as he read the Bible, wait a second. That's my intellectual toolkit for why I'm able to see the lie of the sacred. So he saw the Bible as the ultimate.
What's the lie of the sacred?
The lie of the sacred is that we don't invent gods arbitrarily. We sacrifice victims and we project them into the sky. Over time, they become our gods.
Wow. Okay. Well, that sounds like ancient aliens or something. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll make you a deal. I will read. You send me a link of the couple books or lectures or something, so I can get the gist of this guy's arguments. If you'll read Bart Ehrman's book, or take one of his teaching company course, "How Jesus Became God," or how the New Testament was written, because when you see the history and the context. To me, it undermines the truth value in the empirical sense. Truth value. You can say it still has literary truth value or something like that. But
well, that's a great idea. Here, how about this? I'll send you a copy of René Girard's book, one of his books.
Okay.
And then I'll read the what is the title of your text?
Yeah, How Jesus Became God.
I'll read that, and then you can, if you want to, read that book, and we'll come back and talk about it. How about that?
We'll talk about it. Okay, sounds good.
Well, very good. Well, hey, everyone, check out Heavens on Earth by Michael Shermer. And, Michael, where can we find your work online, keep involved with what you're doing, and anything else?
The general webpage is skeptic.com for my magazine that I publish and edit, and then michaelshermer.com for my books and lectures. Also, TED, I have a couple TED Talks, and Amazon for my books, obviously, the cheap place to buy them. And fine bookstores everywhere actually still carry physical books. I'm still a fan of actual physical books. I listen to audiobooks. I don't do ebooks, but in any case, that's basically it.
I totally agree, and it's a great book. It's very it's a page turner. It goes, and I love your story about the radio. That was an interesting story. So
I'll do that for readers to find out. It's my own kind of mystical experience. These things happen. I'm open-minded to, the possibility that there's other things that we just don't know. We're at a time and place in history where science knows a lot, but we don't know everything. So I'd be surprised, if there's an afterlife and I go there and there's my friends Carl Sagan and Stephen Jay Gould and my parents, and I'm not against this. This would be fine if I wake up, my eyes open, and there they are, and this other world, whatever that would be. I'm not against this. I'm just saying, well, let's just see what happens.
And I think you and I agree, like you said.
We in the meantime, we should work to create a better world here in this life.
Right, and in the meantime, whatever we believe about Jesus, we should seek to imitate him and make the world a better place by being more like Christ. So.
Well, parts of him, not the parts where he says, leave your family. I didn't like that part.
Well, you'll find out what that means in that book. I think you'll like it.
I will get the deeper mythic meaning of the Jesus stories.
Well, very good. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care.